Stephan Mayer
is a CSU member and Parliamentary State Secretary in the German Ministry of the Interior, Building and Homeland. I'm talking to him about refugees and the search for a new homeland. Mr. Mayer, what does the word homeland mean to you?
To my mind, homeland is much more than just a word. In a time of globalization, where mobility and flexibility are increasingly expected of people, it's all the more essential that they have a sense of security to compensate. It seems to me that the wish to have roots, to belong somewhere, is growing rather than receding. In light of that, the idea of a homeland is not traditional or backward-looking, but very up-to-date. I personally find it really exciting that the new Ministry of the Interior has expanded into this key area of homeland. The federal states, which already have homeland ministries, have had an extremely positive experience with it. I'm firmly convinced that in 3.5 years this will be the case at the federal level, and there will be no more doubt as to why we need a federal homeland ministry.
Your family had to leave their home in former Eastern German territory after the Second World War, and they fled to Bavaria. You were born long afterward, but do you still have a deeper understanding for people who are forced to flee their homeland today?
After the Second World War, my maternal grandparents were expelled from near Brno in Moravia and found a new home in Bavaria. The integration of almost 12 million expellees within Germany, around 8 million of them in the Western federal states, is an extremely positive signal for integration. I think that's why people who've been displaced have particular empathy toward people who've been forced to leave their homeland. And especially today, when almost 66 million people have been forcibly displaced worldwide.
More than 1 million of these people have been taken in by Germany in recent years. Many of them have been through perilous journeys to get here. Yet they are not allowed to stay, as their entitlement to asylum is not recognized. You're Catholic. Isn't sending these people back an unmerciful act?
I'm convinced that Germany has behaved in an exemplary manner in this enormous migration and refugee crisis, when compared to virtually any other country. Germany alone has taken in well over 1.2 million refugees since the migration crisis broke out in 2015. This was the case in 2016, but also in 2015. We took in more than all the other EU countries put together.
But these people, the ones who risked their lives to come to Germany but are not allowed to stay, isn't it merciless? Isn't it difficult for you to tell them that they've got to go back?
Germany operates under the rule of law, which has to take different facts, circumstances and legal consequences into account. Of course, people who are granted asylum status and who require protection are permitted to stay in Germany as long as those circumstances are in force. But those with a deportation order have to leave our country, otherwise our asylum procedure is redundant. If we grant refugee status and the right to remain to one person after a lengthy, complicated and meticulous application process, then someone else who is denied refugee status is allowed to stay here too. That would make a mockery of both the asylum process and our rule of law. The rule of law means that people who have been denied the right to stay must leave the country.
Of the many who are supposed to leave, only a fraction are compelled to do so. Why is that?
There are various reasons why things still don't work as they should. Sometimes it's due to the individuals concerned, who don't cooperate in establishing their identity or obtaining replacement passports. Sometimes it's down to the countries of origin, which are not cooperative. Sometimes the individuals concerned are ill or injured and cannot be deported for humanitarian reasons. But I'm convinced we have to improve across the board. We're not doing this as well as we should.
Alexander Dobrindt, who's also in the CSU, says that lawyers for rejected asylum seekers are flooding German courts with their appeals and hindering deportations. Is this true?
I believe Alexander Dobrindt is absolutely correct. He's put his finger on it. Nobody denies it. There are tens of thousands of cases where people facing deportation, meaning people who are not recognized as refugees or who are not eligible for subsidiary protection, deliberately delay their deportation over extremely long periods by engaging in all sorts of legal maneuvers and pulling all the legal stops. Alexander Dobrindt has put his finger on a key issue. We have to improve in this respect as well. We must improve how we implement this entire process.
Wir müssen hier auch noch besser werden, was die Effektivierung der Verfahren anbelangt.
You were, or still are, a lawyer yourself. Do you find it appropriate that Mr. Dobrindt is calling lawyers deportation saboteurs?
Alexander Dobrindt has correctly identified a problem. He hasn't discredited or offended lawyers. To the contrary, lawyers are essential as an independent element in the administration of justice under the rule of law. But there have indeed been cases, and these aren't just isolated cases, that I find worrying. In these cases, lawyers have been using legal maneuvers and tricks to delay deportations for as long as possible, hoping to eventually ensure that their client can remain in Germany.
You've said that you want to solve many of these problems in a single location, in large refugee centers. Why do you think that will work better?
In the future, the conservative CDU and CSU parties want to accommodate new arrivals in Germany in so-called anchor facilities. We want to make this process even more effective. In the future, we only want people who already have received official asylum status to be distributed to cities and across rural areas. Those whose asylum applications are turned down will be sent straight back to their country of origin from these anchor facilities. At the end of the day, it's in the interests of all concerned to determine as soon as possible who has a chance of staying here. For those who don't, they need to return home more quickly.
You plan to accommodate up to 1,500 people in such centers. Some worry that this will cause frustration and violence could escalate. Doesn't it worry you having so many people living long-term in such an enclosed space?
Well, a centre that holds up to 1,500 people is relatively moderate in size. First admission facilities with a far greater capacity already exist in Germany. They often house even more people than that. We also need to ensure that the local population accept the presence of these centres and keep the facilities manageable. So we're looking at having each anchor facility accommodate an average of 1,000 people, with 1,500 as the maximum.
To protect its borders, Bavaria is planning to set up new border patrols. Is this how Bavaria wants to block out a new wave of refugees?
Personally, I welcome the fact that the Bavarian state government, in particular the new Bavarian state premier, Markus Söder, has announced that he will reinforce the Bavarian police force with extra staff, particularly on the borders to Austria and the Czech Republic. Germany's security can only be improved by ramping up spot checks and police controls in the border areas.
Die Polizeiinspektionen im Grenzbereich auszustatten, tut der inneren Sicherheit in Deutschland gut.
Bavaria is implementing its own border controls, refugee centers, and a homeland ministry. There are also elections soon in the federal state. Is the CSU hoping to win back voters it lost to far-right populists, the AfD?
It's the job of politics to solve the problems of our time. Every year, state elections take place somewhere in Germany, and the election for the Bundestag takes place every 4 years. If people always try to see a relation between upcoming elections and new policies, no new measures would ever be introduced. This proposal has absolutely nothing to do with the upcoming state election in Bavaria.
As the end of our interview approaches, I'd like you to complete 3 sentences for us. I grew up close to the Bavarian pilgrimage site of Altötting, which I associate with.
I associate it with a great personal faith. I believe that with all our faith in technology and the rational thinking of our time, each one of us is also guided and led. And thank God there is someone who is watching over us. In light of that, the fact that I come from one of the most important places of pilgrimage in the German-speaking world is a key benefit and orientation point for me.
To migrants who want to make Germany their new homeland, I say,
they are very welcome if they are recognized as refugees or asylum seekers, as long as they become integrated in German society. There are 2 sides to integration. On the one hand, German society has a great deal to offer, but it has justified expectations of the people it accepts, that they take up these opportunities and acknowledge that they are in a country whose Western values didn't simply appear out of nowhere. These values have been defined over centuries of humanism and Christianity. Everyone who is prepared to accept this is most welcome in our country.
Migration and displacement are on the rise. For Germany, this means
that we are still facing a migration crisis which can only be mastered together with our European neighbours, in alliance with many other Western countries and with the countries of origin and transit.
Stephan Mayer, thank you.
Thanks.